The teachings of General Conference are the considerations the Lord would have before us now and in the months ahead.
Our marching orders for each 6 months are found in the General Conference addresses.
For the next 6 months, your conference edition of the Ensign should stand next to your standard works and be referred to frequently.
I encourage you to read the talks once again and to ponder the messages contained therein.
I exhort you to study the messages of this conference frequently, even repeatedly, during the next 6 months.
You're listening to the Conference Talk podcast, where it's conference weekend every weekend. Each weekend on this show, we discuss talks from the most recent General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We'll share some insights, make some connections, and hopefully have a bit of fun as we discuss the words that the men and women God has called to direct this church have given us. And in this particular episode, I am joined by a guest, Mike Rush. Some of you may know him. He is a Latter-day Saint author. And so he's going to be joining us to talk about Elder Cook's address from the April 2023 General Conference, Safely Gathered Home. And we said, Mike Rush would be a good guest to be here because we are talking about the gathering of Israel, which is a little bit of a passion project for you, as it is for President Nelson. And before we begin, I want you to just tell us a little bit about yourself and also share a little conference memory or a conference story or tradition that has stuck out for you. What defines General Conference in the Rush household?
Okay. Well, I'm just a regular guy. I'm an accountant by trade. I'm a CFO for a privately owned equity company out here on the East Coast. One of the
previously from the great state of Tennessee, I might add.
That's right. That's where we met, in Franklin, Tennessee, which is probably the favorite place I've ever lived. And this conference memory that I have is actually from Franklin. We always, all of my kids and we all sit down and we watch conference together. This one conference there in Franklin, we left the windows open because, in Tennessee, around conference time, the weather is usually just wonderful outside. And we're watching conference, and our cat jumps through the window and drops a live chipmunk in the middle of the floor during conference. And we think it's dead. It looks dead. And then all of a sudden the chipmunk jumps up and starts running all around, where we're at. And so, we're all trying to get the thing out of the house during conference.
And the Tabernacle Choir is singing All Creatures of Our God and King or something, right?
That's right. So that was, definitely a fun memory from Franklin, Tennessee. But my wife will always make cinnamon rolls. That's always one of our favorite conference traditions. Then, of course, eating those cinnamon rolls while you're watching the conference and brunches and things like that. So we try to make a fun day out of both Saturday and Sunday.
Well, moving on to the General Conference talk here. So this is Elder Cook. What was your overall impression of Elder Cook's talk here? Safely Gathered Home. What a great title for this, huh?
I thought that it was a wonderful talk. This is a subject that I could talk about for a long time. Elder Cook is talking for 15 minutes or so on this subject and is covering a lot of material in a short period of time. And I think that it is such a fascinating topic. And it's one that, not only he talked about, but he references, Elder or President Nelson, who has said that this is the most important thing happening in the world today. Gathering Israel on both sides of the veil. And if you think about that, it makes me think about when President Nelson in conference said, listen, I challenge you to study the covenants that the Lord has made concerning with Israel. And if you do, you will be astounded. And then, look for those covenants to be fulfilled in your life. And
I love it. President Nelson seems like one of the most dramatic prophets that we've had in a long time in terms of just he really gets down to brass tacks and says, hey guys, this is a dramatic period of time to be alive. And he speaks a lot in superlatives. I've noticed that. And one of the things I often say is prophets are not prone to hyperbole. They don't exaggerate things for effect. When they say something is, in this case, the most important work going on, they mean that. And when he says this is something that is super critical, important, we need to focus on, he's serious about that.
In my study, particularly, with regards to the last days, there are few things that will shape the world more than the restoration of the house of Israel. Unless you have spent time studying the covenants that the Lord has actually made and the prophecies, with regards to the fulfillment of those covenants, you don't understand that. It's just fascinating. Why did President Nelson challenge the church to do that? But why didn't he just tell us what those covenants were and why we should be amazed by them? He didn't do that. And there's been many things like that he's come out and said, in the coming day, we are going to see the greatest miracles the world has ever seen. He doesn't then go on and say, and these are what those miracles are going to be.
And for reference, this talk that you're referring to, this is the 2018 talk, right? The 2018 talk that he gave, Revelation for the Church, Revelation for Our Lives.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then, of course, his, probably one of the most famous or most oft-quoted things that he has said is that, in the coming day, we will not survive spiritually unless we, have the constant guiding influence of the Holy Ghost in our lives. But he didn't go on to explain why that would be the case. It's clear that he wants us to do something with regards to these invitations. And when he is inviting us to hear the Lord, to develop that muscle, we should be exercising that muscle with regards to these invitations that he is extending to us. And I think that Elder Cook's talk is kind of a glimpse into, hey, if you have taken our prophet up on his invitations, you're going to be starting to consider these kinds of things. It is still a very, very high level, 30,000 foot view of what the gathering of Israel means. Just think of the 10th article of faith. We believe in the literal gathering of Israel and in the restoration of the lost 10 tribes. These are two things, and we focus primarily on the first. When you think about the gathering of Israel, that's something that we can do. We can be anxiously engaged in that. We can be involved in missionary work. We can be involved in genealogy and looking for our ancestors and taking their names to the temple and gathering Israel on both sides. But the restoration of something, this is beyond our ability to do. This is greater than what man can do. God restores things. When you begin to study these covenants, you begin to realize, how grand the covenants pertaining to the restoration of Israel are and how interwoven they are into the narrative of the last days.
Before we get to the last days, something that really stuck out to me in his talk was talking way, way earlier in history. Something that surprised me in his talk was he's describing who's in Israel and how Israel incorporates everyone and the seed of Abraham and some of the promises. And he adds this paragraph that I felt was out of place. I don't know if it caught your attention as well. He said, during the council in heaven, in the premortal existence, the plan of salvation was discussed and sustained. And he specifically puts emphasis on the word sustain there. It included certain laws and ordinances of the priesthood instituted before the foundation of the world and predicated upon the gathering. Now, that is something that caught my attention because normally when I've thought of Israel, I've thought of it as the group of people, right? The body of Israel. And it's just the way that history worked out, right? It's this one bloodline. and, huge impact on the world, but definitely more of like a temporal thing is what I've always seen it as. But then here's Elder Cook saying, no, the whole idea of the gathering of Israel, that is a concept that was set apart before the foundations of the world in the pre-existence. And that just, I don't know, that just kind of blew my mind there. And he cites a whole bunch of writings of Joseph Smith, which you can read in the footnotes in Joseph Smith papers, and discourses by Willard Richards to substantiate that this whole concept of the gathering and the restoration of all this stuff about the house of Israel, stuff you would read in Jacob 5 and the allegory of the olive tree and everything, that was the plan from the beginning. And that's just astounding. That's like part of the plan of salvation.
I mean, I remember a scripture in the Old Testament that says, when the Lord created the borders of the nations and set, the divisions of the people, he did so according to the house of Israel.
A house that wouldn't exist for thousands of years. Yeah, it's so cool.
Correct. His son, his only begotten son, would be born into the house of Israel. And when you consider, that your whole council in heaven, what that encompasses, particularly in light of the scriptures of the restoration, I'm thinking particularly of the Pearl of Great Price. Earth is just one of innumerable worlds
without number and their inhabitants, as it says. And is that Moses or Abraham? I think that's Moses, right?
Yeah, that's, I mean, this is so incredible. And then we have the Doctrine and Covenants in section 76. The inhabitants of these worlds become the begotten sons and daughters of God through the atonement of Jesus Christ. So you have this earth playing obviously a prominent role because Christ is sent here. The house of Israel is here. We understand that this earth is going to be celestialized and it will be the abode of God forever. God is the king of the universe, right? So if he's saying that is going to be my abode, he refers to the earth as being his footstool. A footstool is part of the throne, right? When we talk about, ruling and reigning in the house of Israel forever, I mean, you've got to think of these things. These are covenants that the Lord has made with the house of Israel. And anyone who is going to, attain the celestial kingdom will be adopted into these covenants. And it's just astounding. It's interesting. Most people, when they think of the house of Israel, they think of the Jews.
Ancient history, yeah.
The Jews, I guess technically they're one of 13 tribes, right? If you consider Ephraim and Manasseh instead of just Joseph. So where's everyone else? The covenants say that Israel will be as if it had not been cast off. So we're not that way right now.
It's tantamount to saying the Roman Empire will be as if it had never fallen.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a tremendous change in history there to imagine just the complete impression of what God is going to do with what so many people consider to be this ancient relic of history that doesn't almost seem to apply to us anymore. It's like, well, I almost feel like as members of the church, sometimes we look at patriarchal blessings, we're like, yeah, this is cool, it's going to be guidance. And then there's that lineage thing I don't really get, doesn't really make a lot of sense. Maybe it's like more just, it's just leftovers from the fact that we're scripturally based or something. Who cares, right? But no, it has a tremendous importance that Israel is making a big return, so to speak.
A return that will knock your socks off, that will radically change the course of the world. I mean, Jeremiah, if you look at Jeremiah 16, he says, listen, guys, the days are coming when we're not going to talk about the God of Israel that divided the Red Sea. That's going to be old news. You know what we're going to be talking about? The God of Israel who restored the lost tribes.
Old news. Oh, that contemporary reading.
Yeah, that is a very contemporary. I mean, you've heard of the New English translation. Well, that's my translation of that. But that is essentially what that passage is saying. And it's not the only time in Jeremiah that he says that.
Or in our standard works, right? The Bible dictionary.
Yeah. You look at the Bible dictionary under the definition of Israel, kingdom of, and you look at the last two paragraphs, it basically says, listen, the gathering of the lost tribes of Israel will rival the exodus of Egypt. So you think about that, and you think about the gathering that we are involved on both sides of the veil, which is awesome. I was a missionary. I have a daughter out on a mission right now. The fact that teenagers are going out in the mission, and the gospel is being preached to the world by the mouths of, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, and the church has not collapsed is miraculous. But to think that rivals the exodus of Egypt, no. We are talking about something, of the order that, President Nelson is saying, hey, listen, you are going to see the greatest miracles the world has ever seen. Those miracles are going to pertain to the restoration of Israel.
This is a belief that is very unique to Latter-day Saints. Elder Cook points this out. One of the paragraphs in his talk, he said, until the restoration of the Church of Jesus Christ, including the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, and the revelation and priesthood keys given to the prophet Joseph Smith, understanding of the gathering of Israel was fragmentary and limited. And I think still it tends to be a little fragmentary and limited, but it's not for lack of resources. He's saying, look, what we have in the scriptures, there is so much there, especially in the Book of Mormon, that most of Christendom is just completely unaware of. That's why you don't hear about the gathering of Israel when you talk to some of your Christian brothers and sisters. It's just not that big of a thing because it's not set forth super clearly especially in the New Testament, right?
That is exactly true. And I think that when you look at the Book of Mormon in particular, I'm thinking of Nephi when he has this incredible vision of what's going to take place in America in the last days. And he starts talking about the covenants that the Father is going to fulfill with Israel. And then all of a sudden, the angel goes, hey, Nephi, look over there. And then he sees John and says, see that guy? He's going to write the rest of this stuff, and you're not going to write about it.
Can't write this.
And then, Nephi starts transcribing Isaiah chapters. And what are those Isaiah chapters about? They're about the restoration of Israel in the last days.
I have to wonder, he knew that we had those Isaiah chapters already, didn't he? I mean, He talks about seeing the Gentiles going forth with the book. So it's not like he's like, hey, in case you guys don't have these 18 or whatever it is chapters of Isaiah, let me go ahead and write them for you. He knew that we already had them. He's like, it's so important. We need this much emphasis. I'm going to write them again, and I'm going to put your seminary students to sleep, right? Because I'm going to include them because it's that important.
Yeah. I mean, the Isaiah chapters were so, Nephi, he felt that he was kind of stretching it by putting some of these things in. Like you look at the first Isaiah chapters that, he puts in, you're going to see these in First Nephi chapter 21 and 22. Well, and I think maybe 20, 21.
That, dear listener, is the sound of paper scriptures in the background. I don't know if anyone remembers those, yes, but Mike has
them. They are definitely paper scriptures, but I'm not going to read much from these. But just listen to this chapter heading of this Isaiah chapter that Nephi has transcribed. This is 1 Nephi chapter 21. The Messiah will be a light to the Gentiles and will free the prisoners. Israel will be gathered with power in the last days. This is the topic of Elder Cook's talk. Israel being gathered on both sides of the veil.
With power.
With power. And Nephi begins to expound upon Isaiah's words in the very next chapter, in chapter 22. And there can be no doubt that he's transcribed Isaiah and now he's talking about it. When you read the chapter heading of this, of chapter 22, it says, Israel will be scattered upon the face of the earth. The Gentiles will nurse Israel with the gospel in the last days. Israel will be gathered. And then Nephi starts, explaining a bunch of this stuff. And then in verse 29, he says this, "And now I, Nephi, make an end, for I durst not speak further as yet concerning these things." What's the big deal? We're talking about the gathering of Israel. Why can't Nephi spill the beans on what, is going on? Well, he's thinking about the things that he saw in the vision, and the angel saying, "Hey, Nephi, John's going to write about this stuff. You're not going to write about this stuff. Isaiah's going to write about this stuff. Nephi, you're not going to do it."
Was it because Nephi was so plain? Like, Nephi, you're too straight a shooter. We're going to let Isaiah handle this.
Well, isn't that interesting? I mean, the people that wrote about this, the experts, John the Revelator, Isaiah, the people that we're told to study.
The ones that are also the hardest to study.
They're also the hardest. It's like the Lord is testing us in these things. But when you really begin to study this, you begin to see this picture of what will take place in the last days, what some of these covenants mean. I think that that's why the Lord has said, okay, Isaiah's going to talk about these. John's going to talk about these. All of the prophets that were involved in periods in the Old Testament and in the Book of Mormon during the scattering of Israel, they were the prophets that gave us the most insight into these things. Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Zechariah, Ezra. These guys were living in captivity. Daniel, they saw the beginning of the Lord's, promises.
They saw the business end. They were really interested in the nice ending, everything being wrapped together in a bow.
And the Lord shared it with them. To me, it's very similar to how Christ spoke in parables, so that the people that were lukewarm, they weren't totally committed, they got the surface level of understanding, kind of like an onion has layers. They were at the very outer edge. It's so fascinating. There's so much depth to these things.
Adding the layers like that is merciful in that it doesn't add a ton of condemnation and accountability to those who don't understand, right? Whereas it does give incredible light and knowledge to those who do, as Jesus said, have ears to hear and eyes to see.
Yeah, one of my favorite scriptures on this topic is from 3 Nephi 26. I'm going to paraphrase it using my same translation that I used for Jeremiah. But this is Mormon who's compiling all of these records together. And he was totally invested in what the Lord told the Nephites. And he was about to explain everything. And the Lord tells him, "Mormon, you're not going to do that. You're going to give them this tiny portion, which is the lesser portion. And if they will read this, then they'll receive more through the Holy Ghost. But I'm giving them this to try them, to try their faith. For I will try the faith of my people." And I think that is fascinating. There are many prophets in the Book of Mormon that understood these things and were constrained from talking about them beyond a certain point. And you see that same kind of constraint with our current prophet, who points us to these things and says, guys, study this. And if you do, it's going to blow your socks off. I promise you. And then we get to choose whether we're going to follow him or not. And he drops these little Easter egg bombshells that if you're listening,
You go to conference looking for Easter eggs.
That's
Like it's a new Disney show or something.
I
14 things you missed in the latest episode of General Conference.
But how else do you, explain something like, hey guys, in the coming days, you're going to see the greatest miracles the world has ever seen. To me, that's an Easter egg bombshell kind of a thing. Like, holy cow.
And how does he say something like that? And we're like, oh, what a nice talk.
In the last General Conference, the most recent one, he quotes directly from 1 Nephi 14:14, which is, the Lord fulfilling his covenants with the house of Israel and arming the saints with great power because of what's going to be, taking place on the earth in those days when the Lord begins, to remember those covenants and to bring them to pass. If you haven't taken him up on his prior invitations, you don't see the relevance and the importance of some of those statements.
Yep, you got to be paying attention. And Elder Cook's pointing out he's able to do his own work. We don't need to study the ark, but we do have some responsibilities when it comes to Israel as well. So while the Lord is taking care of the restoration and bringing those 10 tribes back, to an extent, we are also deputized to come in there and participate in the gathering of Israel. And this is where most of his talk focused on. He talks about the Polynesian Islands and the great success that we've had over there among scattered Israel. He talks about the success we've had in the British Isles. He talks about the history a little bit. And then he says, now, when it comes to the gathering, we need to expand our vision even more. And he brings in that President Nelson quote. He says, anytime you do anything that helps anyone, again, prophets, not prone to hyperbole. This is a lot of superlatives. This is a very wide net here. Anytime you do anything that helps anyone on either side of the veil take a step toward making covenants with God and receiving their essential baptismal and temple ordinances, you are helping to gather Israel. It's as simple as that. I want to get that printed and put on the background of my phone or something, because it's so easy to get discouraged and caught in the weeds. And here he pivots to talking a lot more about missionary work. It's so easy to say, I'm not seeing any success, right? I mean, you remember you were a missionary, knocking on all these doors and no one wants to talk. And it's 1 out of 100,000 that actually talks to you and wants to actually take that responsibility and that covenant upon themselves. And you're like, I'm supposed to be out here gathering, but I feel more like I'm wasting time. And he's pointing out, it's like, regardless of the outcome, regardless of what success, define success, right? What success you do or don't think you see, anytime you do anything that helps anyone, you are gathering Israel. And that's where the Lord is saying, hey, I'm going to bring about this dramatic thing that's going to rival the Exodus of Egypt, that's going to, in the New Mike translation, knock your socks off. And you get to help. And you know what? No matter how small of an effort it is, it's still participating in this fantastic, great work. And you get some credit for that. I mean, that is just so cool to be involved in that.
It makes me think of, I call it the mini millennium. Fourth Nephi period, where, anyone who made it to that period of time, the scriptures say, hey, there wasn't a soul lost. I mean, those people, they were all gathered. If you just survived those events, the Book of Mormon is the template for our days, right? So it was written by a people preparing to meet Christ for a people preparing to meet Christ. We know that, things are going to get challenging. I mean, just look at the attack on faith in general Christian values, the goodness, the inherent goodness in the United States of America and the family itself. Everything is under attack. If you can help people to hold on to the faith, whatever faith that they have, not to give it up, to survive this trial of faith. Well, guess what? You are gathering Israel, because if you can help these guys get across the finish line into, this millennial period, that is the battle. Survival of some of these things with your faith intact. Even the very elect, according to the covenant, are going to see things that they're not going to have a box for. It's going to rattle them. I mean, there are scriptures that say that the heavens will shake, not in a good way, meaning men's faith in the heavens will be shaken to the point that they just don't believe. And one of the things that we can do as disciples of Jesus Christ, and it's a responsibility that we have, is to help people to retain their faith in the face of such incredible opposition that is going to come. It's going to be much worse than what we have seen today.
And see, if you and I had this conversation 4 years ago, I would have said it needs to be something just clear and dramatic to shake someone's faith that much and to have the kind of impact that you see described there, right? Where it talks about the 10 virgins, the prophets have told us that represents the church, that half of them are not going to be prepared. I would have said, okay, it has to be something just incredibly oppressive and incredibly difficult. And then you watch the effect that we've seen the last few years, and people dropping like flies left and right because, I don't like the church on its social policies. I don't like the church on its vaccine policies. I don't like the church on this, on that, on the finance and stuff. It's like these small, relatively, right, compared to what I had been anticipating, these relatively small things. And we're seeing just this massive contention that precedes a massive, if not gradual, exodus. And it's like, wow, if we are shaking, a lot of the saints are shaking over little small blows like this, a few bad headlines in the press, or, reactions to COVID or LGBTQ or whatever. What's going to happen if there is something big and dramatic?
Yeah, exactly. That's why, you go and you read some of these scriptures about few people being left. Like just read the chapter heading of Isaiah 10. It says that few people will be left when the Lord comes again.
I'm in the younger generation. I look at just the kids that I was in mutual with, and it's like 15, 20% maybe are left still active of the ones who were active back when I was a kid, 2004 to 2009.
Yeah.
It's stark. It's freaky.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that statistic is pretty consistent throughout the church. And like you said, the topics that we have, things are becoming confusing. We're starting to see the things that Isaiah talked about where, the world's kind of flipped upside down, and, wrong is right, black is white, up is down, that kind of a thing. It's very confusing. Satan is a master at what he does. We are seeing, what a tremendous artisan he is at his craft. The world is being deceived. The elect are being deceived. And you really need to know how to hear the Holy Ghost in your life if you're going to survive this. Surviving what we're seeing now, what the world has been seeing has been shaking many people off, but it's also been waking many people up.
Across faith lines, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, holy cow, I can't believe how stark some of these lines are becoming. Helping people to be able to see that and to retain their faith and not abandon it, that is gathering Israel. A lot of people think about missionary work as knocking on someone's door and handing them some literature.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that is missionary work, but also helping someone retain whatever faith that they have in the Lord. And guess what? During the millennium, at the beginning of the millennium, you're going to see people there from all walks of life, all faiths, that have made it there because they listen to the still small voice, and the Lord's going to sort them out.
Well, we often think about the millennium as just being church members, and at the end, sure, that's going to be. But like you said, 4th Nephi is our template. In 4th Nephi, when the voice of Christ spoke to the darkness, he didn't say, hey, all you bishops who survived, right? And hey, all you temple recommend carrying members who made it. No, he's speaking words to the general population. He says, oh, ye who were spared because you were more righteous than they, not because you belonged to the right church, not because you had ticked all the right boxes. Now, certainly in Bountiful, maybe that was the case, but it was just everyone who just was just kind of trying, right? Actually made it. It didn't have to be, that you specifically belong to Church of Christ. In fact, again, given the words of Jesus in the darkness and their reaction at the mount when they're like, when the prophecies are being fulfilled, they're obviously not super familiar with the prophecies or remembering them. It wasn't all just the cream of the crop church members. It was just the cream of the crop of everyone generally.
The people that heard that still small voice and they were acting on it, and they were not persecuting and casting out the righteous from them. They were not. It seemed like the bar was pretty low when you hear Christ's voice to the Nephites.
Blessed are you who didn't kill the prophets. Yes.
Okay.
Thanks for doing me a solid and not destroying my servants for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I just think that most people, they're just not prepared for what is coming down the pipeline because they don't understand the covenants that God has made pertaining to the house of Israel. And we have this tendency as a people to kind of look at the scriptures and interpret them figuratively.
Like everything figuratively.
Yeah. Look at all of these major prophecies in the Old Testament of the initial scattering of Israel. How much of that was figurative? For the 10 tribes, how much of that destruction was figurative? I mean, they were wiped out. Their lands were left desolate. The Jews, they were removed from, Jerusalem. Jerusalem was left uninhabited. Those weren't figurative. So why are we thinking that that's figurative now?
There are things in the scriptures that are figurative, but when we chalk everything up to figurative, and I myself am one who tends to do that sometimes, that's kind of falling into the trap Moroni is saying, where he says, woe unto you who deny the miracles of Christ. And I always say, I would never deny the miracles of Christ. But then to say, well, everything's just kind of figurative. It's going to be more of a spiritual. Well, okay, that's kind of denying the miracles of Christ a little bit and saying, or as he said, or to say that God doesn't work by power anymore.
Yeah. There are so many incredible prophecies that, in the Isaiah chapters in the book, specifically about the restoration of Israel. For example, when Isaiah asks the question, can a nation be born in a single day? He's asking that because when Israel is restored, it will be as if a nation was born in a single day. There's other chapters where it's talking about the Jews as a desolate woman who has lost her children. And then of a sudden she sees this host and goes, whoa, who hath begotten me these? Where have they been seen since I have lost my children? And in a single day, these children say, hey, there's not enough room here in our ancestral lands of inheritance. Make way, that we may have more space. I mean, these things, they're not figurative. These will be literal. The lands of Israel will literally be overflowing with Israelites. The American continent will literally be a safe haven of Joseph. The New Jerusalem is literal. It will be an incredible city of refuge for the saints worldwide that will be gathered to it in miraculous ways that will knock your socks off. I mean, this is kind of Luke 17 kind of stuff. There are 2 people in the field and one is taken and one is left. There are 2 people in a bed, one is taken, one is left. 2 women at the mill, one is taken, one is left. I mean, Joseph Smith actually adds a bunch more verses to that section, and he's talking about, hey, the saints are going to be gathered to Zion during this. This is what's happening. People are being miraculously gathered. These are some of the, covenants and promises the Lord has said he is going to do. So we need to spend more time in the scriptures and understanding, these things. But it is up to us. I mean, just you can take it from President Nelson, who points us in the direction.
Well, in that Revelation for the Church, Revelation for Our Lives talk, President Nelson quotes Elder Maxwell. He says, there is so much more the Heavenly Father wants to tell you. And then he quotes Elder Maxwell, who said, to those with eyes to see and ears to hear, it's clear that Heavenly Father is giving away the secrets of the universe.
Exactly. As people draw near unto the Lord, he draws near unto them. We need to start listening to the prophet. I mean, we listen to General Conference, but do we really act on what he has said?
Give me nice warm fuzzies.
Have you done anything? Did you do those things? As members of the church, we are very good at listening to conference talks. But when it comes to some of these things that he has asked us to do, it's kind of like, in the Book of Mormon, where Christ gives this bombshell discourse on what's going to happen to the Gentiles in the last days if they reject him. And then he commands everyone to study the words of Isaiah.
Does it have to be Isaiah?
Isn't that kind of like these Easter egg bombshells that President Nelson has given us? Where they're these incredible things that are meant to invite us to take action, and whether or not we do take action is entirely up to us. But those of us that listen and act on his counsel, we're putting oil in the lamps. Those of us that are present during General Conference and are listening to the cool talks, and then we're going about our days. This is the parable of the 10 virgins. The Lord requires more of his saints than the fact that we were lying on the couch semi-conscious during, several hours on a Saturday and a Sunday of General Conference. And maybe we re-listened to some talks in a car while we were driving somewhere. That isn't the box that the Lord is wanting us to check on these things. He wants us to act on this and start to see the vision and look for the fulfillment of these covenants in our lives.
When we talk about the need to seek personal revelation, even on these subjects, Satan wins when he can get us to either end of the extreme, is what I've noticed. I see a lot of people in the church, especially influencers and stuff, who talk about personal authority and the necessity of personal revelation, and then they elevate it above priesthood revelation to the point where you can go ahead and start excusing yourself from the standards and the doctrines and the policies of the church because, hey, I prayed and I got a warm fuzzy about being able to violate one of God's commandments. And then on the other end of the extreme, you have people, and this is maybe the way that I tend to lean more, is be very suspicious of personal revelation because I know that I'm really susceptible to deception. And so, and this is where Elder, I believe it was Elder Cook's last conference talk where he talked about a framework of personal revelation. He said, you have to operate within the guardrails of the existing divine revelations that have been given through the prophets. And if you ever receive something that tells you to go against the counsel of a prophet or that contradicts the doctrine of the church, 100% that that's not from the source you suppose, as Elder Oak said.
That's exactly right.
There's that wonderful thing where if you avoid both of those extremes, Satan would love to pull you down the personal revelation trumps everything train and then trick you into going against the church and against the Lord. And he would love for you to just say, okay, I'm content with just the light knowledge that is clearly and explicitly set out for me. And I'm not going to ever ask Heavenly Father about anything at all. I'm just going to wait to be spoon-fed by the prophet. I feel like there's this middle ground where God says, you have perfect faith in my servants and you trust their words and you hold to it assiduously. But you also say, just the plainly spelled out stuff in the scriptures is not enough. I want to receive revelation. I want to develop a personal relationship with the Lord where I can grow in the spirit of revelation.
That's exactly right. I mean, it again, pointing back to the Book of Mormon, you have experiences where people had demonic personalities appear to them as if they were angels of light, giving them these messages that completely contradicted the gospel.
Yeah, okay, like Sherem, use your brain. What kind of an angel says, I'm sent from God, but also there is no God? I mean, that should have triggered a red flag there. Wait a second, your message is internally inconsistent with your existence.
Yeah, but at the same time, he's going, holy cow, this is cool. This is an angel. Look at this light. Look at what he does. He does supernatural things.
But Sherem didn't even believe it at first. He went out and started preaching it. Only when he started being successful did he actually believe this internally inconsistent message from the supposed angel from a not God, right?
Yeah. But, I mean, you can see that pattern playing out. I mean...
Oh, yeah. 4,000 likes on Instagram and people are buying my faith transition cards, right?
Yeah. Or some of these crazy people that have, done some ridiculous things that you go, holy cow, how did you even think that was the Lord talking to you? When, I mean, these things are so far out of the guardrails. You should have known that the source was not the Lord. We're all prone. I mean, we live on an earth that is inhabited by Satan and 1/3 of the hosts of heaven that followed him. And they're all around us and they're putting thoughts and, concepts and ideas in our minds. We have these same kinds of experiences ourselves. We just need to realize, hey, does this jive with the gospel? Or am I receiving some new, fangled revelation that goes up and, above, that's when you should know, hey, yeah, That's the alarm should be going off. I mean, it should not be so easy for people to be deceived, but yeah, they are, and it's going to get worse. These kinds of deceptions are going to be packaged better and better. They're going to be more attractive and more appealing to us. And the gospel contained within the guardrails is going to look more archaic and old-fashioned and out of date.
When Jesus says narrow is the way, boy, you see that. I was so confused by it until you start realizing, as a percentage of the quote unquote, your truth paths that you could go down, this is just one option out of a million, and it seems too constricting. I understand the narrowness of the way now, why he said that way.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well, Elder Cook finishes off by talking about the remarkable blessings. Right? So we've just talked about how difficult it can be and just the deck being stacked against us in so many ways. But Elder Cook promises there are remarkable blessings in sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. The scriptures speak of joy and peace, forgiveness of sins, protection from temptations, and sustaining power from God. And then he closes with the prayer. And remember, we're talking about Israel. A lot of it God's going to do himself, and we get to help out with a small part, but what blessings are available for it? It says, my specific prayer for today is for every child, young man, young woman, family, quorum, relief society, and class to review how we individually and collective accept dramatic counsel to help gather Israel that has been issued by the Lord and our beloved prophet. And boy, that just gives me a nice little boost of spiritual energy. I'm going to talk to people. I'm going to do something. Again, anytime you do anything that helps anyone, you're helping to gather Israel.
Yeah, well, just like your podcast, like this. I mean, this is something. I mean, the Lord can take your efforts and he can magnify them. But if you don't do anything, it's pretty hard to magnify nothing.
The Lord can't drive a parked car. Yeah.
That's right. You got to start moving. I mean, you can take a very small number and it can be multiplied and compounded into a very large number.
And this is coming from a financial guy, by the way, guys.
Yeah, I can promise you that any number multiplied by 0 is 0. So you've got to do something, and the Lord can magnify that. And how many times are we told in the Doctrine and Covenants that there is nothing more important or more beneficial to you than feeding my sheep, gathering people, sharing the light, sharing goodness. That's what the Lord did. That's what we should be. We should be the salt of the earth. It doesn't take much salt to have a dramatic, influence on how something tastes.
I found that out the hard way the other day. Throw away a good bowl of grits.
Yeah. So let's be the salt. Let's be more active and putting our beliefs out. I mean, that's why I started putting out YouTubes. And, frankly, I was shocked when people started watching them. Again, it goes back to the Lord can magnify weak and simple things. And he loves doing that. We need to be wise stewards, and we don't need to be commanded in all things. I mean, who commanded you to do this podcast, right? I mean, we have to have, ideas to do things and then start, hey, yeah, what can I do? And let's start, acting on it. Not everybody needs to do a podcast or be a YouTube guy or write books. In lots of different ways, just how you interact with other human beings, but being a light when the world is becoming so dark. That's being a watchman on the tower. It's shining the light to the, poor wayfaring seaman. I mean, it's being a beacon.
Well, let's talk about some ways that you can be a beacon as we close out. Where can they find you, our listeners?
I have a website, thelost10tribes.com. You can go there.
That's the number 10, by the way.
Yeah, 10. Or you can just, on YouTube, just type in my name, Michael B. Rush, and you'll see some of my YouTubes. A lot of my YouTubes will have my website on the actual YouTube, kind of in the little ticker at the bottom.
And for those who are try before you buy cheapskates like me, your audiobook, your first one, I believe, is you made that available for free, right?
Yeah, you can download it from my website or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Just type in A Remnant Shall Return. That's my first book. Book is focused on the house of Israel, the covenants the Lord has made with the house of Israel. You know what? I had somebody send me this Excel spreadsheet the other day.
I mean, okay, given your profession, you get sent Excel spreadsheets a lot, I'm guessing.
Yeah, but this was every scripture I'd ever quoted about the house of Israel or other covenants the Lord has made. I was shocked by it. There were almost 4,000 different scriptures. This is everywhere in the scriptures. Mm-hmm. Once you begin to see this, it's a pattern that is omnipresent.
Israel's big. It's a big deal. Shows up in all the standard works, and it ain't going away. It's not a historical relic. It's not just something in the history. Israel is, in a very real sense, our future.
As President Nelson said, the most important thing happening on either side of the veil right now pertains to the house of Israel.
Yep. So everybody go out and get started with the gathering. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Conference Talk podcast. This episode, we discuss Elder Cook's talk, Safely Gathered Home. If you enjoyed this episode, give us a 5-star rating. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcasts. You can find links to all our podcast platforms on our website, conferencetalk.org, where you can also follow us on social media, drop us a comment, check out the show notes, find the resources we mentioned in this episode, or learn more about me or any of your other hosts. If you want to follow me, Matthew, you can find me on Twitter at JoyfulRepenter or at my blog, powerinthebook.com. And big thanks to our podcast guest, Michael Rush, for joining us today. You can find him at the Lost 10, that's the number 10, tribes.com. But while we always appreciate new followers, it's even better to follow the prophet and apostles themselves. Remember, although we love speaking about the church and our leaders, we do not speak for them. Everything said on this podcast represents our own personal opinions, for which we invite you to tune in next week. More personal opinions on the Conference Talk podcast.